Jesus reveals himself as God and as the bread of life from heaven, sent by the Father for our salvation. In 1263, a German priest, Peter of Prague, was on his pilgrimage to Rome. He stopped at Bolsena and was celebrating the Holy Mass above the tomb of Saint Christina. He is described as being a pious priest, but he found it difficult to believe that Christ was actually present in the consecrated host. While celebrating Holy Mass, he had barely spoken the words of consecration when blood started to seep from the consecrated host and trickle over his hands onto the altar and the corporal. The priest was immediately confused. At first he attempted to hide the blood, but then he interrupted the Mass and asked to be taken to the neighboring city of Orvieto, the city where Pope Urban IV was then residing. The Pope listened to the priest's account and absolved him of his doubt and of his sins. He then sent emissaries for an immediate investigation. When all the facts were ascertained, he ordered the bishop of the diocese to bring to Orvieto the host and the linen cloths bearing the stains of blood. In the Gospel according to St. John chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." In verse 51, he said, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world." In verse 44 he said, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draw him, and I will raise him on the last day." In verse 46 Jesus adds, "No one has seen the Father except the one who is from God." Through these words, Jesus Christ reveals himself as God and as the bread of life from heaven. He is sent by the Father for our salvation. We are called to believe in him and be nourished by him so that we may have salvation. I am is the name for God in the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 3 verse 14, God said to Moses, "I am who am." This is what you are to say to the Israelites, "I am has sent me to you." God identifies himself as I am. So according to St. John, when Jesus says, "I am the bread of life," he proclaims that he is God and the life-giving bread. The bread of life Jesus speaks about is prefigured in prophet Elijah when the angel nourished the prophet in the desert while he was fleeing from the soldiers of Queen Jezebel. In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, the prophet Elijah challenged 450 of the pagan god Baal's prophets. He defeated them in a public sacrifice contest and killed all of them. Baal was not just one kind of god, they were a mixture of gods. They represented power, anger, storm, wealth, and pleasure. Since Elijah proved them to be false gods, the furious queen Jezebel sent soldiers to kill the prophet. Elijah is discouraged and he fled for his life. God sent an angel to feed him and strengthen him in his flight. The miraculous food provided by God sustained him through a 40-day pilgrimage to Mount Sinai. In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 7 to 8, this is what we read. "And the angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said to him, 'Arise, eat, for thou hast yet a great way to go.' And he arose and ate and drank and walked in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights unto the mount of God, Horeb. The food from heaven became a source of nourishment for prophet Elijah." In the letter to the Ephesians chapter 5 verse 2, St. Paul exhorts us to taste the odor of sweetness brought about by Jesus' sacrifice. He said, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us as a sacrifice to God for an odor of sweetness. Jesus is the bread broken for us. Jesus is the wine poured out for us. He is our God who gives Himself to us for our salvation. He gave Himself to us in His supreme sacrifice on Mount Calvary, and He continues to feed us with His body and blood in the Eucharist. Let us put aside all our doubts and profess our faith in the Son of God, eat His body and drink His blood with devotion, that we may be nourished and that we will have eternal life. The psalmist reminds us in Psalm 34, verse 90, taste and see that the Lord is sweet. Blessed is the man that hopes in Him. Taste and see the goodness of the Lord.